Today I want to talk about The Legend of Zelda and specifically which game we may see come to Nintendo Switch next. And you do have to put a slight asterisk with that statement because we are also in the year of 2024, which is heavily rumored and reported upon to be the year that Nintendo is likely launching new console hardware. And with that being the scenario, we could easily be talking about the next Legend of Zelda game also launching on Nintendo's next-gen platform. So just keep that in mind. We are talking about what Nintendo might do next for Zelda on both the current Switch and or Nintendo Switch 2 or whatever they end up calling it, hopefully Super Nintendo Switch. But when you look at what we've seen so far in terms of Zelda franchise support on the Nintendo Switch, we have a lot of the franchise playable, albeit only a few actual official Nintendo Switch releases over the course of this console's life cycle. When you look at it from a mainline Zelda series perspective, we of course have Zelda Breath of the Wild, which launched simultaneously on the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch as the big launch game, and of course was what took the Zelda franchise to new heights from a sales and mass audience appeal perspective, because we saw Zelda games hit 10 million plus sales in the past, but we never were talking about in the 20-30 million range like we are with Breath of the Wild and now Tears of the Kingdom. And while I myself am somebody who has been a lifelong Zelda fan and still very much prefers the old play style of linear 3D Zelda games and even 2D Zelda games in a lot of ways, I also understand the appeal of a mass open world and think that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have done so much right for the franchise. So you have Breath of the Wild, then you fast forward past that, and we did indeed get Link's Awakening remastered or completely remade for the Nintendo Switch. Now this game performed very well from a sales perspective, as it's estimated to be over 6 million from the last update that I can find online around its total unit sales. It may be over 7 now because that number was from 2022. And so when you talk about remastering and porting classic 2D Zelda games, giving them that simple remake treatment and re-releasing them, as this was originally of course a Game Boy game, that is a strategy I do think that we will see Nintendo continue to lean into, and you'll want to keep that in mind as we are talking about the possibilities for what might be next in the Legend of Zelda franchise. From there, we of course in 2021 saw the release of Zelda Skyward Sword HD. This is the origin story for the Legend of Zelda franchise, but it also is one of the 3D games that did not go over quite as well with fans for a couple of different reasons. One, when it was originally released on the Wii, of course you could only play it with motion controls, and that's literally the entire option on how you play the game. No traditional button mapping available. You have to swing your sword in the direction that the game wants you to, and that did turn off some players, myself included, because while I do think it's a cool idea to have as an option to play motion controls with Link, I don't want to play a 60-hour game necessarily entirely based around motion controls. And of course we saw Nintendo solve for that problem on the Switch HD release, but it is still inching in around the 4 million in total sales from what I can find online in terms of the most recent estimates. And I think when you talk about that Zelda game compared to games like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, or even Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, it definitely has less fan interest than those 4 games that I just listed off in terms of 3D Zelda, and you can see that straight from the sales numbers compared to those other entries. Now then you had obviously the massive follow-up to Breath of the Wild most recently in 2023, which is none other than Tears of the Kingdom, and we have seen that game rapidly fly past the 20 million mark, and we don't have any super recent estimates on the sales data for it from Nintendo, although we should expect to hear that soon in February, as soon as next week in fact. But this was the evolution of the Breath of the Wild formula, taking it to not just open world but open air, as Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma stated it himself. They wanted to remove all the boundaries in terms of how the player explores the world and literally link the skies above all the way down to the grounds beneath Hyrule that they created within the depths in the game. And it's kind of mind-blowing that they pulled off that type of gameplay style on the aged hardware of the Nintendo Switch. And while we've had spin-off games like Hyrule Warriors and things have multiple entries on the Nintendo Switch, I am sticking to those 4 in terms of what I am counting as mainline Zelda releases. I'm also not acknowledging obviously all of the additions for NSO like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and most recently the Zelda Oracle games being added in as playable content on the system. Those are the vanilla base games. I am talking about what will Nintendo do next with this franchise, and could it be an entirely new game altogether, or might it be a port or remaster treatment next? I do tend to lean more towards the port or remaster treatment, as Nintendo has stated themselves that they like to have something Zelda ideally release every year during the Nintendo Switch Switch generation. Now, they haven't exactly hit that, especially from a mainline franchise perspective, but more years than not, we have had something Zelda release on the Nintendo Switch, and I don't think that 2024 will be any different from us. We also have some very interesting interview comments from Eiji Aonuma, essentially acknowledging that while the fans love traditional Zelda and what that was, and the type of experience that that delivered at the time, being Ocarina of Time all the way through Skyward Sword, that they're not really looking back, or they're not worried about their old games in their own words, meaning that we might see small Zelda spin-off projects where maybe they develop a from the ground up new 3D game and it's a smaller project in scope, similar to what we would see released on something like a DS or 3DS back in the day when they were of course developing Zelda games on 2 different consoles. Maybe we see something like that, but for the mainline entries in the franchise, we should not expect the Zelda team to necessarily revisit that classical formula at all. They might bring back more elements from it, and it might not always be open world and open traversal, but it does sound like they are very much committed to more options, more open progression, and less restrictions overall. It just seems like that's the direction they want to go in, and to be honest, as a lifelong Zelda fan, I will miss some of the more linear games, and that's why I'm hopeful that we maybe see Nintendo produce them alongside of these more massive major releases that will likely be 5 to 7 years apart in release time. If you just look at the entire history of how long it took them to develop Tears of the Kingdom and release it on the Switch from when Breath of the Wild came out, and you have to keep in mind that they were technically using the same base Hyrule. Yes, they added on a ton of stuff, ton of content, but the actual world was already created for them, and it's a similar graphical style to Breath of the Wild. So the next mainline entry may very well still be 5+ years off. In fact, I'm expecting it to take at least that long. So in terms of games that might be able to tie us over while we are waiting on that long development cycle, ports and remasters do tend to be the simple solution to keep Zelda fans plugged in and to have us playing content while we're waiting on what the Zelda team is crafting next from an original gameplay perspective. I would expect Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD to both make it over at some point in time. Whether or not they are 2024 games, we do not know. You probably remember all of the leaks and rumors around these games really flaring up after Skyward Sword HD was officially revealed, mainly due to Andy Robinson, Jeff Grubb, and some others in the know that typically do have some inside knowledge on products before they are officially released, and Andy Robinson being the big one that did indeed say something to the effect of they're 100% coming to the Nintendo Switch and it's only a matter of when. But of course, here in 2024, we have still not seen Nintendo acknowledge those games in any way, shape, or form, so it makes you wonder, are they pushing them back for later into Switch 2, or are they just putting them on the sidelines altogether because they did release them on the Wii U, and while they didn't have the option to sell to many people on that system, maybe they feel like they've already given those games the remaster treatment and they don't want to bring them back just too early. But I am still very much of the mindset that those are in the pipeline at any point in time as potential new Zelda releases. Now, then you also have to have the conversation around another 2D Zelda release, because we might see Nintendo go in some kind of tick-tock formula where we get a 3D remaster and then we get a 2D remaster, or actually vice versa if you look at how Link's Awakening came out on the Nintendo Switch and then a couple years later we got Skyward Sword HD. So would the next games in line actually be something like the Oracle games, or maybe they go and surprise us with Minish Cap getting some kind of remake treatment? Maybe Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks come over as a double pack and those get modern control treatments and they are ported to the Nintendo Switch. We would definitely need to have Wind Waker playable on the Switch before then, in my opinion, because if you know how those games align from a story perspective, you want to play those after the Wind Waker. But anyway, stuff like that is absolutely on the table, and I think it's a fairly safe bet that we get most of the Zelda series at some point in time remastered/remade for current console generation hardware, meaning the Nintendo Switch or the Nintendo Switch 2, depending on just how close we are to transitioning to that hardware. From there, you could also entertain the idea that Nintendo is having something like a Grezzo or their B team that does work on Legend of Zelda products create something entirely new. We saw A Link Between Worlds release on the 3DS, and that of course was actually a new Zelda adventure with new gameplay mechanics, a new story, and everything, while very much being a love letter to A Link to the Past. But it was not an exact Link to the Past remake, it was just set in the same world, but it did have its own fresh ideas and fresh story to offer. I do not think that the Legend of Zelda team is necessarily done with creating new, more linear style Zelda games, but they are considered the side projects or the smaller Zelda title releases, not the big Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wilds of the world that we will expect to release every 5 to 7 years. And so I do think that something like that is on the table as well. All of this said, while us Zelda fans are waiting to see what's next for the franchise, I think it is fairly safe to expect lots of Legend of Zelda franchise love and support over the course of the end of the Switch generation and into the Nintendo Switch 2's generation. This is just one of those franchises that makes money for Nintendo, and they understand that. Why do you think we're seeing all of the ports and remasters for the Mario franchise right now? In addition to a brand new 2D Mario game with Wonder, which was absolutely incredible, we also got Super Mario RPG released in the same year, and now we're talking about Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door also coming in the pipeline in 2024, not to mention Luigi's Mansion HD and Princess Peach Showtime. Like, Mario's getting a ton of love right now, and I think The Legend of Zelda will as well. We also know that a movie is ongoing for The Legend of Zelda right now, live action, that's being developed as we speak. We don't know when the launch date of that movie is going to be, but there's clearly going to be a big push to keep this franchise as relevant as ever and take it to new heights. And so you do that by releasing frequent games, and you do that by crossing it over into other forms of media and entertainment. Eiji Aonuma was even spotted recently at a Super Nintendo World construction site, which could lead you to believe that, yes, indeed, they are lining some stuff up for years and years from now to have a Legend of Zelda section of a theme park, which also would tie into another way Nintendo is going to continue to promote and sell this franchise to new users and old users alike. At the time of filming, we are expecting the first of the year February Nintendo Direct to take place at any point in time now, anytime in the next couple weeks. So it is a time to get excited if you are a Legend of Zelda fan. Let's hope we learn about a new project, port, or remaster sooner rather than later. But I do indeed think that the support for the franchise is bright from here, and that we should expect a lot of Zelda content to release between the Switch and Switch 2, and hopefully many of the ports and remaster projects, as well as some brand new titles, may be unveiled over the course of the next 5 to 7 years. But that's really where I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video. What do you hope we see next from the Legend of Zelda franchise? With the recent comments from Eiji Aonuma saying they're not going backwards to the old traditional formula, do you think that it just means more ports and remasters from the old classic games brought over? Or do you think that they may indeed develop a brand new from the ground up Zelda game, but a little bit more simple in scope and not such a open world / open air type of gameplay experience like these Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom games? And out of every Zelda game in the franchise that could get a port or remaster, which one would you hope we see next? An Ocarina of Time remake, a Majora's Mask remake, or do you just want Wind Waker and Twilight Princess easily playable on modern console hardware? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch the video on screen next if you haven't already. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.